just because just because we are not allowed to gather for our annual Palm Sunday procession does not mean that we are not on a journey. Just because we are right now, for the most part, stationary does not mean that we are not headed somewhere today. Just because there is no traffic does not mean that the road ahead of us is clear. Just because crowds can't gather does not mean that our minds are altogether free of distraction. Just because we are not allowed to be together does not mean that we are alone. Brothers and sisters, we are very much on a journey, one the likes of which none of us have encountered in our lifetimes. It is strange days. But even with all that strangeness, even with the overwhelming amount of uncertainty, the variables of which continue to change on an almost daily basis, the destination of that journey remains the same. And that is what Palm Sunday is here to remind us of today. We are still destined for Jerusalem. I've never really paid attention to the last two verses of this story until this week. It says, when Jesus entered Jerusalem, the whole city was in turmoil, asking, "Who is this?" I want to focus these brief remarks around just that sentence. First, notice it says Jerusalem is a city in turmoil. There are 3 feasts of pilgrimage in the Jewish calendar where people would come from all over to make sacrifice at the temple in Jerusalem and to worship there. And this one is the biggest of them all. This is the Passover. That is the backdrop to the Palm Sunday story. Which is to say, the crowds aren't there for just Jesus. Some just made the trip with him from the north, ranging the spectrum from genuine disciples to celebrity coattail riders. One estimate I read says that though Jerusalem had a stable population of about 30,000 people at this point, during the Passover, Jerusalem held closer to 200,000 people. This, as you might imagine, creates South by Southwest levels of turmoil in a city. And though you and I have been spared the South by Southwest turmoils of traffic and tourists crowding our favorite restaurants, we are living in a different kind of generalized turmoil right now. Actually, it feels like we are living almost in its exact inverse. It's a turmoil of isolation and anxiety. Not of economic boon, but of economic despair. One that isn't limited just to our city, but is spread throughout the globe. One that even the most curmudgeon-y amongst us is now longing for the presence of flower crown wearing, e-cigarette smoking millennials en masse. And for Jesus, there was a particular turmoil inside the generalized turmoil of the city he was entering. He alone in the exuberant crowds knew what was coming. He knew that suffering and death were in his future. And though none of us are granted the foreknowledge Jesus both enjoyed and was haunted by, many of us can relate today to the feeling of acute distress amidst generalized turmoil in this moment. Some of us are not isolated in our homes. Some of us are in the fray trying to get others out of it. Others of us are afraid, just for ourselves, for our friends, for our family. Some of us are afraid whatever the statistics are saying. This virus has had now one more week to crawl ever closer into our lives. In the midst of this turmoil, whether general, acute, or both, it is natural for us to be asking questions about God, to be asking the same question as those gathered and gathering in Jerusalem, to look at Jesus in a moment like this and to ask ourselves, who is this? I don't know where you are with this question today, whether your faith is fierce or frail or completely forgotten. But wherever you are, my sermon today amounts to just this encouragement. Ask that question now like never before. It might feel frightening, I know. It might feel like repeating a class you're positive you've already taken. Whatever is going on in your life, whatever is going on in your head, take up this question with a renewed intensity and vigor right now. Who is Jesus? These are bizarre and beleaguering days. And the night looks like it will get darker yet before we emerge into the dawn, but it could simultaneously be true of the season ahead of us, that it is one of your own spiritual renewal. For this season, however long it lasts, we cannot go to church. And that is a source of deep sadness for us, as it should be. It grieves my heart every day not to be with you. Church is the place that we go to learn and relearn the answer to precisely this question: who is Jesus? But just because we can't go to church does not mean that you and I cease to be the church. And it does not mean that we cease to ask and to find answers to this question: who is Jesus? It has only changed the mechanisms through which we can entertain such a question. What I mean is this: inside the sadness of this season, inside the mourning of this season, inside of us not being able to gather physically in the same place, I think inside of that sadness is an opportunity for you to rediscover your membership in the priesthood of all believers. That this season of you not being able to go to church is an opportunity for you to remember anew that you still are the church. That your household is in some way its own parish. Whether you live in a multi-generational household of 15 or whether you live alone. That space, your own home, can itself be a context for worship, prayer, study, and devotion. I don't have anything extraordinary in mind. I'm not saying that we should all of a sudden become monks. Maybe your family used to pray before dinner, but somewhere along the way you stopped. Maybe now is a moment for you to start that practice back up again. Maybe it's never felt very comfortable to have spiritual kinds of conversation with your spouse or your children. Maybe now is a moment to lean towards that discomfort. Maybe you start logging on Facebook in the mornings and saying morning prayer with us from the prayer book. Maybe you light a candle while you make your coffee and list before God those who are hurting in your life. Maybe you take up reading your Bible every day. Stuck in our houses, this is, I believe, an opportunity for us to re-engage the rhythms and the habits of our households and to carve out here a little more space for us to entertain the question: who is Jesus really? And you're not doing this alone. We are still your church family. We are still in this together. We are still your church staff. I am still your parish priest. We are here to help. Every week, as long as we're doing this, we're going to be sending home, like we did today, a St. Mark's at Home packet, a guide to help you try to engage in worship and formation in your own household, suggested prayers, pieces of art and music for you to reflect on for your own journey of discipleship. We're still making phone calls, so many phone calls to check on you, to just see how things are going. We're still making grocery runs. We're still in regular touch with all of our partner organizations in Austin who are on the front lines of this crisis. We are here to help. Who is Jesus? The Palm Sunday story gives us as good a place to start as any in starting to ask that question again. The Palm Sunday story says, he is a king, but he's on a donkey? Interesting. Tell me more about this Jesus. Wait, he's a prophet? But he's from Nazareth? Huh. Tell me more about this Jesus. Stick with this question, brothers and sisters, through this week and beyond, even as things in our world might get more difficult. Because at the end of the day, Jesus is either God or he's not. And if he's God, he will remain God through whatever is coming our way. And if he's not, well, then I need to get a different job. This sermon is nothing but an invitation. This is the beginning of Holy Week. And you won't have the opportunity to come to church for this Holy Week. But you will have an opportunity to walk with Jesus into Jerusalem. Turmoil may lie ahead of us. But remember, Jesus has already gone ahead of you. There is no darkness to which God in Christ has not already descended. And as we walk together into the darkness of Holy Week, into whatever darkness may be lying ahead of us, the bonds between us and God may grow stronger than ever before. That certainly is my prayer for us on this Palm Sunday. Amen.